Welcome to World of Sleepcraft, where the rich lore of Azeroth becomes your gateway to peaceful rest. Tonight, settle into comfort as we journey through one of the most ancient and enduring tales in all of Warcraft. This is the complete story of the Zandalari, the oldest empire in the world, whose golden spires have touched the heavens since before recorded history began. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts drift as we travel back through the mists of time to an age when the world was young and the first trolls walked upon the primordial landscape of ancient Kalimdor. Allow the tales of kings and prophets, of mighty Loa and sacred mountains to carry you gently toward the shores of sleep. In the beginning, before the great empires of humanity rose and fell, before the high elves built their gleaming spires, before even the night elves discovered the well of eternity, there were the trolls. They emerged in those earliest days of Azeroth's history, among the first mortal races to walk upon the world, and they would prove to be among the most enduring. The earliest trolls were primitive creatures scattered across the vast supercontinent of ancient Kalimdor in small bands and family groups. They lived as hunters and gatherers, following the great herds of beasts that roamed the endless plains and dense jungles. But even in those early days, the trolls possessed something that set them apart from the other primitive races that shared their world. They could sense the presence of powerful spirits, beings of immense power that dwelt within the natural world around them. These spirits, which the trolls called Loa, inhabited sacred groves and ancient mountains, deep caverns and rushing rivers. Some took the forms of great beasts, while others existed as shapeless presences of pure spiritual energy. The trolls learned to commune with these Loa, offering prayers and sacrifices in exchange for blessings and guidance. This spiritual connection would become the foundation of troll civilization and culture for millennia to come. Among all the lands of ancient Kalimdor, one region drew more trolls than any other. Rising from the heart of the continent, directly south of the mysterious Well of Eternity, stood the Zandalar Mountains. These peaks reached higher than any others in the known world, their summits piercing the very clouds themselves. More importantly, the Zandalar Mountains were home to an unprecedented concentration of Loa, wild gods of tremendous power who had made their homes among the sacred peaks. The trolls who settled near these mountains could feel the spiritual energy radiating from the ancient stone. They believed that the highest peaks were the most sacred of all, closest to the heavens where the most powerful Loa dwelt. And so, over countless generations, the most ambitious and powerful trolls began to climb, establishing settlements ever higher on the mountainsides, ever closer to the divine beings they worshipped. The tribe that claimed the highest peaks called themselves the Zandalari, named for the mountains that had become their home. They were the most powerful and the most devout of all the troll tribes, their mystics and priests developing the closest relationships with the Loa. From crude shrines built of rough stone, they offered their prayers and their sacrifices, and in return, the Loa granted them visions and power beyond that of any other trolls. Among the Zandalari there arose a leader whose vision would shape the future of all troll kind. His name was Dazar, and he was unlike any troll who had come before. Where other chieftains were content to lead their small bands in the daily struggle for survival, Dazar dreamed of something greater. He saw the potential for the scattered troll tribes to become something more than primitives squabbling over hunting grounds and water sources. From his earliest youth, Dazar had been marked for greatness. The priests of his tribe spoke of visions they had received, prophecies that a leader would arise to unite all of Trollkind under a single banner. Dazar believed himself to be that leader, and he set about proving it through his actions. He was a hunter without equal, bringing down beasts that grown warriors feared to approach. He was a speaker of rare persuasion, his words inspiring others to follow him, even when the path seemed impossible. But perhaps most importantly, Dazar possessed a faith that could move mountains. He believed absolutely in the power of the Loa, in their desire to see the trolls reach their full potential as a civilization. This faith gave him the courage to attempt what no troll had attempted before, the conquest and unification of all the scattered tribes. Dazar led his people out of the muck and mire of the lowlands, up the slopes of the sacred mountains to the highest plateaus. He proclaimed that these peaks, home to the mightiest Loa, would become the foundation of a great civilization. Under his leadership, the crude shrines grew into permanent temples, and the temporary camps became the first streets of what would one day be the greatest city in the world. But Dazar's ambitions did not stop at building a city for his own tribe. He sent emissaries to the other troll tribes that had settled in the shadows of the Zandalar Mountains, and to those dwelling in the distant jungles and forests beyond. He spoke of unity, of the power that could be achieved if the scattered tribes came together under a single banner. Some tribes resisted, seeing no reason to bow to Dazar's authority, but many others recognized the wisdom in his words. Through diplomacy, through demonstration of the spiritual power his priests had achieved, and when necessary through force of arms, Dazar united the disparate troll tribes into a single nation. He became the first true king of the trolls, ruling over a unified people for the first time in their long history. The city he built would come to bear his name, transformed over the centuries from a collection of temples into the magnificent Zuldazar, the golden throne of the Troll Empire. Dazar was more than just a political leader. He was also a warrior of unmatched skill, undefeated in combat throughout his long life. He was the first troll to tame the great raptors that hunted in the jungles below the mountains, forming a bond with these fierce predators that would become a tradition among the Zandalari for thousands of years. His companions, Rabun and Tazala, became legendary in their own right, their descendants serving the rulers of Zandalar for countless generations. Under Dazar's rule, the foundations of Zandalari civilization were established. The priests and mystics who communed with the Loa became a revered caste, their wisdom and spiritual power guiding the decisions of the throne. These spiritual leaders developed elaborate rituals for communicating with the Loa, ceremonies that would be passed down through countless generations with barely any change. They built temples of ever-increasing grandeur, each dedicated to a different Loa, each designed to focus and amplify the spiritual energies that flowed through the sacred mountains. The warriors who protected the empire developed fighting techniques that would become legendary across Azeroth. They learned to move through the dense jungle without making a sound, to strike from ambush with devastating precision, to fight in perfect coordination with the great beasts that had been tamed to serve the empire. The Zandalari warrior caste became the backbone of the Empire's power, their discipline and skill unmatched by any other force in the ancient world. Craftsmen and artisans created works of stunning beauty, adorning the temples and palaces with gold and precious gems. The Zandalari discovered rich veins of precious metals in the mountains around their city, and they developed techniques for working these materials that would not be matched for thousands of years. Gold became the signature material of Zandalari architecture, covering the great pyramids and temples until they gleamed like small suns in the light of day. Visitors from other lands would speak in awe of the golden city that could be seen from miles away, its brilliance a testament to the wealth and power of the Zandalari Empire. The social structure of Zandalari society became increasingly complex under Dazar's rule. The priests held the highest status below the royal family, their connection to the Loa making them essential to every aspect of daily life. Below them came the warriors, then the craftsmen and merchants, and finally the farmers and laborers who formed the base of the pyramid. Yet even the lowest Zandalari could aspire to rise through the ranks, for the Loa chose their servants based on spiritual merit rather than birthright. Education became highly valued in Zandalari culture. Schools were established where young trolls could learn the history of their people, the proper forms of worship for each Loa, and the skills they would need to serve the Empire. The most promising students were selected for advanced training in the priesthood, the military, or the administrative corps that managed the day-to-day affairs of the growing city. When Dazar finally passed from the mortal world after a reign of many centuries, his body was laid to rest in a great tomb atop Mount Mugamba, the most sacred peak in all of Zandalar. The temple complex built around his resting place was called Atal Dazar, meaning roughly the place of Dazar, and it became the eternal home for all the kings and queens who followed him. Generation after generation, the rulers of the Zandalari Empire would be entombed in these sacred halls, watched over by the spirits of their ancestors and the blessings of the Loa. The Zandalari Empire grew mighty under the rulers who followed King Dazar, but their peace would not last forever. In those ancient days, before the ordering of the world, terrible beings had ruled over Azeroth. The old gods, entities of chaos and corruption, had built a vast black empire that covered much of the world. Their servants were legion, including a race of intelligent insectoids known as the Aqir. When the Titan-forged servants of the Pantheon came to Azeroth and overthrew the Black Empire, most of the Aqir were driven underground, where they lay dormant for untold ages. But one of the old gods' most powerful generals, a creature called Kithix, had escaped the Titan-forged's wrath. Mortally wounded in battle with the Keeper Tyr, Kithix had crawled to the base of the Zandalar Mountains and entered a state of hibernation, waiting for the day when it might rise again. The trolls who settled near this place could sense that something dark dwelt within the mound of blackened stone at the mountain's base. Their shamans and mystics warned that the place was forbidden, that whatever slumbered there should not be disturbed. For many generations, this warning was heeded and the mound was left alone. But there are always those who refuse to listen to the wisdom of their elders. A group of outcast Gurubashi trolls, led by a witch doctor named Zando, discovered the sleeping Sathrax. Guided by the whispers of a sentient dagger called Zalatath, They performed dark blood rituals to awaken the ancient horror. Kithix stirred to life, immediately killing those who had revived it. But the damage was done. The sea thrax reached out with its vast psychic powers and found the Aqir still sleeping beneath the earth. With its commanding presence, Kithix rallied the insectoid swarms from their long slumber. The Aqir emerged from their tunnels by the millions, driven by their ancient hatred of all non-insectoid life and their devotion to the old gods who had created them. They constructed a vast underground empire called Azjakir, and when Kithix judged their numbers sufficient, they swept across the surface world in a tide of chitinous horror. The Aqir were unlike any enemy the trolls had faced before. They were utterly alien, their minds incomprehensible to mortal races, their numbers seemingly endless. As Kithix's army drew closer to the Zandalar Mountains, it became clear that no single tribe could hope to stand against them. The very survival of trollkind hung in the balance. In this hour of desperate need, the Zandalari used their prestige and spiritual authority to forge an alliance unlike any that had existed since the days of King Dazar. Messengers were sent to the great jungle troll empire of the Gurubashi in the south, to the forest troll empire of the Amani in the north, and to the ice troll nation of the Drakari in the frozen wastes beyond. Despite their long history of rivalry and occasional warfare, the troll nations understood that they faced extinction if they stood alone. Under the leadership of the Zandalari, the tribes united into a single mighty force, which they termed the Empire of Zul. The Zandalari priests and mystics took command of the spiritual warfare, calling upon the Loa Soi to lend their power to the defense of trollkind. The warriors of all the tribes put aside their feuds and fought shoulder to shoulder against the unending Aqir swarms. The war that followed was long and brutal, lasting for years as the tide of battle swept back and forth across ancient Kalimdor. The Aqir were relentless, driven by Kithix's commanding will and their own instinctive hatred of all other life. They cared nothing for their losses, sending wave after wave of warriors to crash against the troll defenses. Their numbers seemed infinite, their determination absolute. The battles of the Aqir War were unlike anything the trolls had experienced before. The insectoids fought with no regard for their own survival, their individual lives meaningless compared to the will of the collective. They could burrow beneath the earth and emerge behind enemy lines, attack from tunnels that the trolls could not see until it was too late. Their chitinous shells were resistant to many weapons, and their mandibles could tear through armor and flesh with equal ease. The first years of the war were disastrous for the trolls. Entire cities fell to the Aqir swarms, their populations either killed or driven into exile. The insectoids showed no mercy, no desire for negotiation or surrender. They wanted only the complete extermination of all non-insectoid life, a goal programmed into them by the old gods who had created them in eons past. But as the war continued, the trolls began to adapt. They learned the weaknesses of their enemies, the ways to exploit the Aqir's rigid thinking and their dependence on Kithix's commands. They developed new weapons and tactics, drawing on the wisdom of their shamans and the power of their Loa. But the trolls were fighting for their very existence, and they proved themselves cunning and adaptable foes. The Zandalari generals developed ambush tactics perfectly suited to the jungle terrain, using their knowledge of the land to whittle down the Aqir numbers while avoiding direct confrontation with their overwhelming forces. The troll priests called upon the Loa for aid, and these wild gods proved devastatingly effective against the insectoid armies. In one climactic battle, the assembled Loa fought directly against Kithix itself, wounding the sea thrax so grievously that it was forced to retreat. This victory gave the trolls hope and momentum, and they pressed their advantage relentlessly. The Amani tribe, known for their ferocity in battle, tracked Kithix's trail far to the northeast, cutting through an endless mass of Aqiri guardians. In a final desperate battle, the entire Amani tribe launched a suicidal assault on Kithix and its remaining minions. The fighting was apocalyptic, entire forests burning as the two forces clashed. When the dust settled, only a tiny fraction of the Amani remained alive, but Kithix was finally dead. The sea thrax that had nearly destroyed all of Trollkind lay broken and still, its threat ended forever. Atop the site where they had killed Kithix, the surviving Amani established a settlement that would eventually grow into the temple city of Zulaman. It became a monument to their sacrifice and their victory, a reminder for all time of what the trolls could achieve when they stood united against a common enemy. With Kithix slain, the Aqir lost the commanding intelligence that had unified them. The survivors scattered across Kalimdor, fleeing in different directions and eventually evolving into distinct species. Those who fled to the frozen north congregated around the underground prison of the old Gudyog Saran, evolving into the Nerubian race and establishing the kingdom of Azjol Nerub. Those who fled to the southwest remained near the resting place of the old god Sithun, evolving into the Chiraji race and establishing the empire of An-Kiraj. A third group fled southeast, drawn by the lingering energies of the dead old god Yisharj, evolving into the Mantid race and founding the colony of Montives. The threat of the Aqir was ended, at least for the time being, and the trolls were free to continue building their civilizations. But the Empire of Zul, that great alliance of all troll nations, did not long survive the peace. Without a common enemy to unite them, the old rivalries and territorial disputes resurface. The Gurubashi, Amani, and Drakari drifted apart, each returning to their own lands and their own concerns. Only the Zandalari maintained their position of spiritual authority over all Trollkind. They did not seek to rule the other tribes, for that had never been their way. Instead, they served as keepers of history and tradition, preserving the ancient ways and the sacred knowledge of the Loa. When disputes arose between the troll empires, Zandalari priests would sometimes serve as mediators, their neutrality and wisdom respected by all sides. The Zandalari also took upon themselves the duty of recording the history of their people. They built great libraries within Zuldazar, filling them with scrolls and tablets chronicling the deeds of kings and the wisdom of priests. They preserved the stories of the war against the Aqir, ensuring that future generations would remember both the threat that had nearly destroyed them and the unity that had saved them. The scribes of Zandalar developed sophisticated writing systems capable of recording the complex theological discussions of the priests and the intricate genealogies of the royal line. They created scrolls that could survive for millennia, protected by enchantments that prevented decay and damage. The libraries of Zuldazar became repositories of knowledge unmatched anywhere in the ancient world, containing information about subjects ranging from herbalism to astronomy, from military tactics to spiritual philosophy. Scholars from other troll tribes would sometimes travel to Zuldazar to study in these libraries, seeking knowledge that their own peoples had lost or never possessed. The Zandalari welcomed them, seeing the spread of learning as part of their sacred duty to all of trollkind. In return, these visiting scholars would bring news and knowledge from their own lands, enriching the Zandalari understanding of the wider world. The period following the Aqir War was also a time of great artistic achievement for the Zandalari. Their craftsmen created works of stunning beauty in gold, jade, and precious stones, adorning the temples and palaces of Zuldazar with treasures that would be coveted for millennia. Their musicians developed complex ceremonial compositions that could last for hours, accompanying the rituals that marked every important event in Zandalari life. Their dancers performed movements that told the stories of the Loe and the great deeds of past kings, their bodies becoming living embodiments of sacred tales. In the ages that followed the Aqir War, the troll empires flourished. The Gurubashi built a vast jungle empire in the south, their territories stretching across much of what would one day become Stranglethorn Vale and beyond. They constructed great pyramids and temple complexes deep in the jungle, worshipping their own patron Loa with elaborate rituals and sacrifices. The Amani, despite the terrible losses they had suffered against Kithics, rebuilt their strength in the forests of the northeast. They became known as the fiercest warriors among all the troll nations, their hatred of outsiders legendary even among their own kind. The great forest troll cities of Zulaman and Torwatha became centers of power that would endure for thousands of years. The Drakari carved out their own empire in the frozen wastes of the north, adapting to the harsh conditions with characteristic troll resilience. They built their cities around the worship of powerful ice Loa, developing a culture that prized strength and endurance above all else. Though they had less contact with the other troll nations due to the great distances involved, they remained part of the greater troll family, their priests traveling to Zandalar on occasion to consult with the Zandalari sages. Meanwhile, the Zandalari continued to develop their homeland into something truly magnificent. Zuldazar grew from a collection of temples into the greatest city in the world, its golden spires visible for miles across the surrounding jungle. The Zandalari mastered the art of working gold and precious gems, adorning their buildings and themselves with treasures that would have been the envy of any other race. The relationship between the Zandalari and their Loa deepened with each passing generation. The wild gods who dwelt in the Zandalar mountains became integral parts of Zandalari society, each Loa developing their own following of devoted worshippers. Temples dedicated to specific Loa arose throughout the city, their priests maintaining the sacred rituals that had been passed down since the time of King Dazar. Among all the Loa worshipped by the Zandalari, a few rose to particular prominence. Rezan, the great devil Saur Loa, became known as the Loa of Kings, his blessing required for any troll to legitimately claim the throne of Zandalar. He represented strength, leadership, and the sacred duty of the monarch to protect their people. Rezan was massive, even by Devilsaur standards, his roar capable of shaking the very mountains, his physical presence awe-inspiring even to those who had devoted their lives to serving the Loa. The Zandalari prelates, holy warriors who served as the guardians of the faith, drew their power directly from Rezan's blessing. These holy warriors were the elite defenders of the Empire, their martial prowess enhanced by divine power that flowed from the Loa of kings. They served as the personal guard of the throne, as judges in matters of law, and as the final line of defense against any threat to the empire. To become a prelate was the highest aspiration of any Zandalari warrior, requiring decades of training and a spiritual connection to Rezan that few could achieve. The prelates developed their own traditions and rituals, separate from but complementary to the regular priesthood. They wore armor blessed by Rezan himself, carried weapons forged in ceremonies that invoked the Loa of King's power, and performed feats of strength and endurance that seemed impossible for mortal beings. When the prelates marched to war, enemies fled before them, for they carried the authority and the power of Zandalar's greatest Loa. Paku, the Pterodax Loa, became the patron of the Zandalari navy and of those who traveled by air. Her followers learned to ride the great flying reptiles that nested in the mountain peaks, becoming scouts and messengers for the Empire. The winds themselves seemed to answer to Paku's will, and her blessing was sought by any who hoped to travel safely across the seas. Gonk, the raptor Loa, was unique among the major Loa of Zandalar. While most Loa jealously guarded their followers, demanding exclusive devotion, Gonk taught the trolls that they could draw upon the power of multiple Loa if they possessed the skill and will to do so. He became the patron of the druids among the Zandalari, teaching them the secrets of shapeshifting and nature magic. His teachings sometimes brought him into conflict with Paku and her followers, a rivalry that would persist for thousands of years. Kragwa, the great frog Loa, made his home in the marshlands that would one day become Nazmir. He was a jovial and generous spirit, beloved by the common folk for his approachability and his habit of protecting those in need. His priests were known for their healing arts and their deep connection to the natural world. Kragwa was enormous, larger than many buildings, his voice a deep rumble that could be heard for miles across the swamps. Despite his imposing size, he was gentle with those who sought his blessing, often protecting travelers from the dangers that lurked in his domain. The followers of Kragwa developed their own healing traditions, learning to brew potions and perform rituals that could cure diseases and mend wounds. They became the primary healers of Zandalari society, their skills sought after throughout the empire. When plague or injury struck, it was the priests of Kragwa who answered the call, their green-tinted magic flowing like the waters of the swamp itself. Other Loa held important places in Zandalari worship as well. Akunda, the thunder lizard Loa, represented the power of storms and lightning, his domain extending over the weather itself. Torkali, the direhorn Loa, was patron to those who tamed and worked with the great beasts of Zandalar, her blessing essential for anyone who wished to ride the massive dinosaurs that served as mounts for the Zandalari military. Jani, the Saurid Loa, was a trickster deity, beloved by children and those who lived on the margins of society, her shrines found in unexpected corners throughout the empire. The relationship between the various Loa and their followers created a complex web of alliances and rivalries that mirrored the political structure of Zandalari society. The followers of different Iloa sometimes competed for influence, their debates carried out in the halls of the Zenchuli Council and in the streets of Zuldazar itself. Yet when external threats arose, these rivalries were set aside, all Loa and all followers uniting to protect the empire that they all called home. But perhaps no Loa would prove more significant to the future of the Zandalari than Bwonsamdi, the Loa of death. Unlike the other major Loa, Bwonsamdi was not a wild god of nature, but a spirit of the afterlife itself. He claimed dominion over the souls of all trolls who died, gathering them to his realm in the other side and tending to them for eternity. His relationship with the Zandalari was complex, for while they honored him as a necessary part of existence, they also feared his power and his tendency to make binding bargains with the living. Bwonsamdi was a Loa of deals and arrangements, never giving his aid freely, but always extracting a price in return. His priests walked a fine line between serving their Loa and protecting their fellow trolls from the potentially ruinous bargains he might offer. Yet despite the danger he represented, the Zandalari knew that Bwonsamdi was essential. Without him, their souls would have no guardian in the afterlife, no protector to guide them through the darkness beyond death. The Zenchuli Council, the advisory body that assisted the monarch in ruling the empire, included representatives of all the major Loa, as well as the most powerful mystics and seers of this realm. This council became the center of religious and political power in Zandalar, second only to the throne itself. The high priests of Rezin, Paku, Gonk, Kragwa, and the other major Loa debated matters of state and faith, their decisions shaping the course of the empire for generations. Among the members of the Zenchuli Council, the prophets held a special place. These were mystics, blessed with the ability to see visions of the future, their insights often proving crucial in times of crisis. The most powerful prophets could see events years or even centuries before they occurred, though the interpretation of their visions was never certain. Over time, the position of chief prophet became one of the most influential in the entire empire, the holder of this office serving as the personal advisor to the king himself. Around the 12,000 years ago, the Zandalari encountered another powerful empire far to the northeast. The Mogu had established their dominion over the land that would later be known as Pandaria, ruling over a vast realm of slave races and accumulated power. Unlike the trolls, the Mogu traced their lineage to the Titan-forged, the servants of the Pantheon who had ordered Azeroth in ancient times. The first contact between the Zandalari and the Mogu came through the sea. Zandalari explorers, ever seeking to expand their knowledge of the world beyond Zandalar, had ventured far to the northeast and discovered the coast of Pandaria. What they found there amazed and disturbed them in equal measure. The Mogu were powerful beyond anything the Zandalari had expected from a race so lacking in spiritual connection. They wielded magic that came not from the Loa, but from the Titan technology they had inherited from their creators. Their society was rigidly hierarchical, with the Mogu as undisputed masters and all other races as slaves to be used and discarded as they saw fit. The Zandalari delegation reported back to the Zenchuli Council, recommending that the Empire establish formal relations with the Mogu. The Council debated the matter for many days, some arguing that the Mogu were godless abominations best left alone, others pointing out the potential benefits of trade and alliance with such a powerful neighbor. In the end, pragmatism won out. The Zandalari sent ambassadors to the Mogu court, offering terms for a formal alliance. The Mogu, though they looked down upon the trolls as mere mortals inferior to their Titan-forged heritage, recognized the value of the Zandalari's naval power and their unique spiritual abilities. The relationship between the Zandalari and the Mogu was complicated from the beginning. The Mogu viewed themselves as inherently superior to all other races, their Titan-forged heritage making them the rightful rulers of the world. The Zandalari, for their part, saw the Mogu as spiritually impoverished, their lack of connection to the Loas making them incomplete no matter what power they might wield. Yet despite their mutual disdain, the two empires found common ground in their shared hatred of the Aqir. The Mantid, that branch of the Aqir that had fled to the southeast after the Aqir War, had become a constant threat to the Mogu's borders. The Zandalari still remembered the devastation the Aqir had nearly inflicted upon their own people, and they were willing to ally with almost anyone to prevent such a catastrophe from recurring. The alliance between the Zandalari and the Mogu was never warm, but it proved effective. The two empires traded knowledge and resources, each benefiting from the other's strengths. The Mogu appreciated the Zandalari's naval power and their expertise in spiritual matters, while the Zandalari valued the Mogu's vast armies and their powerful artifacts. When the Pandaren, the slave race that served the Mogu, rose up in revolt, the Zandalari sent forces to assist their allies in crushing the rebellion. It should have been a straightforward matter, a minor uprising quickly suppressed by the combined might of two great empires. But the Pandaren proved more resilient than anyone had anticipated. The revolt grew into a full-scale war, dragging on for years as the Pandaren stubbornly refused to submit. The Zandalari forces fought in many of the major battles, their warriors and priests proving their worth on the battlefields of Pandaria. But as the war continued, doubts began to grow among the Zandalari commanders. The Pandaren were not the pushover they had expected, and the casualties were mounting. Eventually, the Pandaren succeeded in overthrowing their Mogu masters. The once mighty Mogu Empire collapsed, its Thunder King Lei Shen struck down, and its armies scattered. The Zandalari forces withdrew from Pandaria, their alliance with the Mogu broken by defeat. They left behind a lasting impression on Pandaren culture, becoming legendary figures of terror in children's stories and folk tales. For the Zandalari, the failed intervention in Pandaria was a sobering lesson. They had stretched their power too far, involving themselves in a conflict that had ultimately proven unwinnable. The experience reinforced their traditional policy of isolation and self-reliance, focusing on the strength of their own empire rather than foreign adventures. Yet the memory of the Mogu alliance would not fade entirely. Some among the Zandalari remembered the power that Lei Shen had wielded, the Titan-forged secrets he had uncovered. When the Thunder King fell, he was buried with great ceremony, his tomb sealed against the day when he might be needed again. The Zandalari kept records of these events, preserving the knowledge of how the Mogu had raised their dead heroes to fight again. This knowledge would prove significant in ages to come, when desperate circumstances would lead some Zandalari to seek the resurrection of the Thunder King himself. But that story lay far in the future, separated from the Mogu alliance by thousands of years of history. The greatest catastrophe in the history of Azeroth was triggered not by the trolls, but by another race entirely. The Kaldore, who had evolved from trolls exposed to the magical energies of the Well of Eternity, had built a great civilization around that font of arcane power. Their reckless use of the well's magic drew the attention of Sargeras and the Burning Legion, bringing about an invasion that threatened to destroy the entire world. The Zandalari had watched the rise of the Kaldore with a mixture of curiosity and concern. These new beings, with their purple skin and elongated ears, bore little resemblance to their troll ancestors. They had rejected the worship of the Loa in favor of arcane magic, turning away from the spiritual traditions that had sustained trollkind since the earliest days. The Zandalari considered them lost, corrupted by the energies of the well that had transformed them. When reports reached Zandalar of demonic armies pouring through portals near the Well of Eternity, the Zandalari priests consulted their Loa for guidance. The visions they received were terrifying, scenes of fire and destruction, of demons consuming everything in their path, of a darkness that threatened to swallow the entire world. The Loa warned their followers to prepare, to strengthen their defenses, for a great trial was coming. The War of the Ancients, as it came to be known, was fought primarily by the Kaldore and their allies against the demonic hordes. The Zandalari and other troll nations played little part in the conflict directly, as the fighting was concentrated far from their territories. But they could see the consequences of the battle even from a great distance: strange lights in the sky, earthquakes that shook the mountains, and an ever-growing sense of impending doom. Some among the Zandalari argued that they should march to join the fight against the demons. The Legion was a threat to all life on Azeroth, they said, and the trolls could not simply stand aside while others fought for the survival of the world. But the majority counseled caution. The Kaldori had brought this disaster upon themselves through their reckless use of arcane magic. Let them face the consequences of their choices. When the Well of Eternity was destroyed in the final cataclysm of the war, it tore the supercontinent of ancient Kalimdor apart. The land buckled and shattered, continents separating as the seas rushed in to fill the void left by the imploding well. Millions died in moments as entire regions were swallowed by the waves. The Zandalari mystics sensed the catastrophe coming moments before it struck. In a desperate act of magical power, they wove protective wards around their homeland, shielding the Zandalar mountains from the worst of the destruction. The spells held as the world shook and broke apart around them, the ground beyond their protections crumbling and sinking beneath the waves. When the cataclysm ended and the Zandalari lowered their wards, they discovered that their homeland had been transformed. The Zandalar Mountains, once connected to the vast continent of Kalimdor, now rose from the sea as an isolated island. The lands around them had been utterly destroyed, leaving nothing but endless ocean in every direction. The Zandalari emerged from their protected sanctuaries to survey the devastation. Where once there had been trade routes and neighboring settlements, there was now only water stretching to the horizon. Ships that had been docked in distant harbors were gone, swept away by the tsunamis that had accompanied the Sundering. Communication with the other troll nations was impossible. their fate unknown. For many years after the Sundering, the Zandalari believed themselves to be the last surviving trolls in the world. They mourned for their lost cousins, performing rituals to guide the souls of the departed to Bwansamdi's care. The priests spoke of the Sundering as a punishment from the Loa, a consequence of the Kaldore's folly that all of Trollkind had been forced to share. But the Zandalari were nothing if not resilient. They set about adapting to their new circumstances, developing the skills and technologies they would need to survive as an island nation. Fishermen learned to navigate the dangerous currents that surrounded Zandalar, bringing in catches that would sustain the population. Farmers terraced the mountainsides, creating new agricultural land to replace what had been lost. Builders constructed new temples and dwellings, determined to prove that the Zandalari Empire would endure. This event, which the trolls called the Sundering, marked the end of the old world and the beginning of the new. The great troll empires that had once been neighbors, connected by roads and trade routes, were now separated by vast distances of open sea. Communication between the troll nations became difficult, and the sense of unity that the Zandalari had fostered began to fade. Yet the Zandalari themselves had survived largely intact. Their city of Zuldazar still stood upon its sacred peak, its golden spires gleaming in the sun as they had for thousands of years. Their Loa still dwelt in the mountains and jungles, their blessings still flowing to their devoted worshippers. The island of Zandalar became a self-contained world, home to everything the Zandalari needed to continue their civilization. In the centuries that followed the Sundering, the Zandalari adapted to their new circumstances. They developed their navy, building fleets of ships that could cross the dangerous waters between Zandalar and the other lands that remained above the waves. They maintained contact with the other troll nations when possible, sending expeditions to verify that the Gurubashi, Amani, and Drakari had survived. The news was mixed. All of the major troll empires had endured, though all had suffered losses and upheaval. The Gurubashi had lost much of their territory to the advancing seas, their remaining lands forming a peninsula that would later be known as Stranglethorn Vale. The Amani and Drakari had fared better geographically, but had been weakened by the general chaos of the Sundering. The Zandalari continued their role as the spiritual leaders and record keepers of Trollkind, even as the practical connections between the troll nations grew ever more tenuous. They dispatched priests and scholars to the other empires, maintaining the ancient traditions and ensuring that the history of their people was not forgotten. When crises arose that threatened the other troll nations, Zandalari assistance was often sought. One such crisis emerged in the Gurubashi Empire, and it would prove to be one of the greatest threats the trolls had ever faced from within their own ranks. The Gurubashi had always been a proud and ambitious people, their jungle empire second only to the Zandalari in power and prestige. In the days before the Sundering, they had controlled vast territories in the south of ancient Kalimdor, their pyramids rising above the jungle canopy like the peaks of stone mountains. Their warriors were feared throughout the world. Their priests wielded powerful Loa magic, and their wealth rivaled even that of the Zandalari themselves. But the Sundering had struck the Gurubashi harder than any other troll nation. Much of their territory had been swallowed by the advancing seas, and the lands that remained were transformed by the cataclysm. The jungle that had once been their strength now seemed to close in around them, the creatures that dwelt within becoming more dangerous and aggressive. The trade routes that had connected them to the other troll nations were destroyed, leaving them isolated and struggling. The Gurubashi tried to rebuild, but their former glory seemed forever beyond their reach. Their population had been decimated by the sundering and the famines that followed. Their military strength was a shadow of what it had been. And perhaps worst of all, their faith in the Loa had been shaken by the catastrophe that their gods had failed to prevent. In this time of desperation, some among the Gurubashi began to seek new sources of power. They turned away from the traditional Loa, whose protection had seemingly failed during the sundering, and looked for gods who could offer them the strength to reclaim their lost glory. It was in this atmosphere of spiritual uncertainty that the worship of Aqir began to take hold. Deep within the heart of the Gurubashi priesthood, a new faith began to take root. Its object of worship was a Loa unlike any other, a spirit of such malevolent power that even the other Loa feared to speak its name. This was Aqir, known as the Soul Flayer, a being of pure hunger and bloodlust. Unlike the wild gods, who demanded offerings of food and treasure, Aqir craved only blood. He filled his followers with murderous rage, driving them to ever greater acts of violence in his name. The carnage that followed Aqir's worships suited him perfectly, for he fed upon the blood and suffering of the slain, growing ever more powerful with each sacrifice. At first, the worship of Aqir was confined to a small cult within the Gurubashi Empire. But as the decades passed and Aqir's power grew, his influence spread like a plague. More and more Gurubashi abandoned their traditional Loa to embrace the Soul Flayer, drawn by promises of power and vengeance against their enemies. The capital of the Gurubashi Empire, Zul'Gurub, became the center of Aqir's cult. Within its ancient temples, the priests of the Soul Flayer performed blood rituals of increasing horror, sacrificing thousands of victims to feed their god's insatiable hunger. The Gurubashi Empire was slowly being consumed from within, its people driven mad by Aqir's influence. Word of these events reached the Zandalari, and their priests were horrified by what they learned. They searched their ancient records and found references to Aqir from ages past, fragments of knowledge that had been preserved since the earliest days of troll history. What they discovered filled them with dread. Aqir was no ordinary Loa. He was an ancient evil that had been bound and imprisoned long ago, his worshippers scattered, and his name nearly forgotten. The Gurubashi had unwittingly released him from his confinement, and if he was allowed to continue growing in power, he would eventually become unstoppable. The Zandalari had no choice but to intervene. A great expedition was assembled, drawing upon the finest warriors and priests of Zandalar. They sailed across the seas to the shores of the eastern kingdoms, arriving at the island of Yojamba near the Gurubashi capital. From this base, they launched their campaign against Aqir and his followers. The war that followed was brutal and costly. The priests of Aqir fought with fanatical devotion, willingly sacrificing themselves to fuel their god's power. The jungle around Zul'Gurub became a killing ground, soaked with the blood of both sides. But the Zandalari had the advantage of their Loa's blessings and their ancient knowledge of how to combat evil spirits. The Zandalari commanders developed strategies specifically designed to counter Aqir's influence. They identified the high priests who served as conduits for the Soul Flayer's power, targeting them with precision strikes to weaken the connection between God and followers. They used sacred rituals to create barriers that Aqir's corruption could not easily penetrate, protecting their own warriors from the madness that claimed so many of the Gurubashi. The fighting lasted for months, neither side willing to yield. Aqir's followers believed that they were on the cusp of summoning their god in his full physical form, which would make him essentially invincible. The Zandalari knew that if they failed, the consequences would extend far beyond the Gurubashi Empire. A fully manifested Aqir could threaten all of Trollkind, perhaps all life on Azeroth. In the final battle, the Zandalari priests managed to sever Aqir's connection to the physical world, banishing his avatar and weakening his influence over his followers. The remaining cultists were either killed or driven into hiding, their temples in Zul'Gurub desecrated to prevent Aqir from being summoned again. But Aqir was not truly destroyed. The Soul Flayer was too powerful to be killed by mortal means, thus merely weakened and forced back into the spirit world. His most devoted followers, a group of priests known as the Atal-I, escaped the destruction of their cult and fled into the swamps to the east. There they built a new temple called the Temple of Atal-Aqir, hidden deep within the marshes, where they continued their efforts to summon their master back to the physical realm. The Zandalari discovered this new temple and attempted to destroy it, but the Atalai had chosen their location well. The swamps were treacherous, filled with hostile creatures and deadly diseases that decimated any force that attempted to reach the temple. The green dragon aspect Ysera eventually solved the problem by sinking the entire temple beneath the waters of the swamp, but even this did not stop the Atalai entirely. For thousands of years afterward, the threat of Aqir would continue to loom over the troll people. The Zandalari maintained vigilant watch over any signs of the Soul Flayer's return, knowing that they would need to be ready to fight him again if his followers ever succeeded in their goal. The centuries continued to pass, and then the world changed around the Zandalari in ways both subtle and profound. The human kingdoms rose and fell in the eastern kingdoms. The High Elves built their civilization in Quel'Thalas, using magic stolen from the Night Elves. The Orcs came through the Dark Portal from Draenor, bringing war and destruction to Azeroth. Through it all, the Zandalari remained on their island, largely isolated from the conflicts that raged across the world. They watched the rise and fall of empires with the patience of a people who had seen civilizations come and go for 16,000 years. They kept their records and maintained their traditions, secure in the knowledge that their Loa would protect them as they always had. The kings of the Zandalari continued to rule from the golden throne of Zuldazar, each blessed by Rezan with long life and supernatural strength. The Zanchuli Council advised each monarch in turn, the high priests of the major Loa debating matters of faith and politics within the great halls of the palace. The prophets continued to receive visions of the future, their warnings heeded or ignored according to the wisdom or folly of each generation. Among all the prophets who had served the Zandalari kings, none would prove more significant than the one who would eventually be known simply as Zul. From his earliest youth, Zul was burdened with visions of darkness and destruction, prophecies of terrible events that would shake the foundations of the world. Many of his predictions came true, establishing his reputation as the most accurate seer in living memory. The gift of prophecy was both a blessing and a curse for Zul. He could see the future more clearly than any of his contemporaries, but what he saw brought him no comfort. His visions were filled with catastrophe and upheaval, with the fall of kings and the death of Loa, with blood and fire consuming all that the Zandalari had built over 16,000 years. Night after night, these terrible images haunted his dreams, driving him to seek ways to prevent the disasters he foresaw. Over time, Zul's visions began to change him. Where once he had been a loyal servant of the throne, focused only on protecting the empire, he began to develop his own agenda. He came to believe that the traditional ways of the Zandalari were leading them to destruction, that only radical change could save his people from the doom he had foreseen. These beliefs would eventually drive him to betray everything he had once sworn to protect. Zul rose to become the chief prophet of the Zandalari Council, the personal advisor to King Rastakhan himself. Rastakhan had ruled the Zandalari Empire for over 200 years by then, blessed by Rezan with a lifespan far exceeding that of ordinary trolls. He was a proud and powerful king, beloved by his people for his strength and wisdom. But he was also set in his ways, resistant to change, and confident perhaps to the point of complacency. The relationship between Zul and Rastakhan was complex. They had known each other for many years, some said for as long as Rastakhan himself had been alive. Zul had served the king loyally for decades, his prophecies helping to guide the empire through numerous crises. But as time passed, Zul's visions grew darker and more insistent, and his warnings more dire. King Rastakhan also had a daughter, a young princess named Talanji. Unlike her father, Talanji was not content with the old ways of doing things. She questioned traditions that had stood for thousands of years, seeking new solutions to old problems. She believed that the Zandalari needed to adapt to survive in a changing world, that isolation was no longer a viable strategy for the empire. Talanji's views often put her at odds with the more conservative members of the Zandalari Council, but her father allowed her to speak her mind. Rastakhan saw potential in his daughter, a fire and determination that reminded him of his own youth. He hoped that she would one day make a fine queen, though he had no intention of relinquishing the throne anytime soon. The balance of power in the Zandalari Empire was delicate, with Rastakhan at the center, Zul advising from the shadows, and Talanji pushing for change at every opportunity. This balance would be tested to its breaking point by the events that were about to unfold. When the cataclysm struck Azeroth, its effects were felt even in the distant corners of the world. The return of Deathwing and the sundering of the elemental planes sent shockwaves across the entire planet, reshaping coastlines and toppling mountains. Even the island of Zandalar, which had survived the original sundering largely intact, was not immune. Prophet Zul had foreseen the coming of the cataclysm. For years he had warned Rastakhan of a great armored dragon that would emerge from the depths of the earth to clench the world in his ferocious jaws. He had spoken of floods and earthquakes, of lands sinking beneath the waves and mountains crumbling to dust. When Deathwing finally burst forth from Deepholm, Zul's prophecies seemed to be coming true. The effects on Zandalar were significant, but not catastrophic. The region of Nazmir, once considered the shining heart of troll civilization, was struck particularly hard. The land began to sink, the great temples and monuments of ages past slowly descending into what would become a fetid swamp. Thousands of Zandalari lost their homes, forced to flee to higher ground as their ancestral lands disappeared beneath the mire. Zul saw this as merely the beginning. He proclaimed that all of Zandalar would eventually follow Nazmir into the sea, that the island was doomed to destruction. He urged Rastakhan to take drastic action, to prepare the Zandalari people for evacuation before it was too late. The Empire needed new lands to settle, new territories to conquer, if it was to survive. But as the years passed after the cataclysm, Zul's most dire predictions did not come to pass. The island stabilized, the sinking ceased, and while Nazmir remained a swamp, the rest of Zandalar was largely unchanged. Many among the Zandalari began to doubt their prophet's words, questioning whether his visions had been accurate or whether he had simply been mistaken about the extent of the danger. What few realized was that Zul had deliberately exaggerated the threat of the cataclysm for his own purposes. He had seen an opportunity in the crisis, a chance to achieve goals that he had nursed in secret for many years. By convincing Rastakhan that the Empire was in imminent danger of destruction, Zul obtained permission to take a significant portion of the Zandalari fleet and use it as he saw fit. With these ships and the warriors loyal to him, Zul set about implementing his true agenda. He sent expeditions to the other troll empires, attempting to forge an alliance that would unite all of Trollkind under Zandalari leadership. He approached the Gurubashi and the Amani, the Drakari, and even the small Faraki tribe in the deserts, proposing that they join together to build a new troll empire greater than any that had existed before. Most of the tribes were receptive to Zul's overtures. The cataclysm had affected them all to varying degrees, and the promise of Zandalari support was appealing. Only the Darkspear tribe, those trolls who had joined the Horde under the leadership of Vol'jin, refused to participate. Their loyalty to their Orcish allies outweighed any sense of kinship with their Zandalari cousins. The alliance that Zul forged led to renewed attacks on Zul'Gurub and Zul'Aman as the trolls attempted to reclaim their ancient territories from the powers that now controlled them. These attacks were eventually repelled by the combined forces of the Horde and Alliance, and the Troll Alliance began to fracture. But Zul was not finished. He had another plan in motion, one that would take him far from Zandalar to the mysterious land of Pandaria. Since the failure of their alliance with the Mogu thousands of years before, the Zandalari had maintained a distant interest in Pandaria. They knew that Lei Shen, the Thunder King, had been buried with great ceremony, his tomb sealed against the day when he might be needed again. Zul saw in this an opportunity that was too good to pass up. Without Rastakhan's knowledge or permission, Zul sent a portion of his forces to Pandaria. His servants, including Prophet Karzul and the spirit binder Garajal, led the expedition to find the Thunder King's tomb. Using knowledge preserved since the ancient alliance with the Mogu, they performed the rites necessary to raise Lei Shen from the dead. The resurrection was a stunning success. Lei Shen rose from his tomb with all his power intact, immediately taking command of the situation. He accepted the Zandalari alliance, recognizing in them kindred spirits who understood the value of ancient power and proper hierarchy. Together, the Thunder King and the Zandalari forces set about reuniting the scattered Mogu clans under a single banner once more. The campaign that followed was brutal and effective. Lei Shin had lost none of his cunning or his cruelty during his long sleep, and the Mogu responded to his return with enthusiasm. The Zandalari provided naval support and spiritual power, their priests complementing the Mogu's Titan-forged abilities. The Throne of Thunder, Lei Shen's great fortress, was reactivated, its defenses restored to full power. But the forces of Azeroth did not sit idle while a new threat emerged in Pandaria. The Horde and Alliance, despite their ongoing conflict, both recognized the danger that Lei Shen represented. They launched separate assaults on the Throne of Thunder, fighting their way through the Mogu and Zandalari defenders to confront the Thunder King himself. In the end, Lei Shen was defeated once more, struck down in his own throne room by the combined efforts of Azeroth's champions. Prophet Zul and many other Zandalari perished in the fighting, their dreams of a new Mogu Troll alliance dying with them. The Ku survivors retreated from Pandaria, their fleet diminished and their hopes crushed. For Zul, the failure in Pandaria was a setback, but not a defeat. He still commanded significant forces, and he still had plans that reached far beyond simple military conquest. The experience in Pandaria had taught him something valuable about the nature of power and resurrection, knowledge that he would put to use in the years to come. King Rastakhan was not pleased when he learned the full extent of Zul's activities. The prophet had acted without authorization, spending Zandalari lives and resources on adventures that brought no benefit to the empire. The relationship between the king and his prophet, already strained, grew colder. But Zul remained on the Zanchuli Council, his influence diminished, but not eliminated. While these events unfolded across the world, a different kind of threat was growing within Zandalar itself. In the region of Nazmir, where the cataclysm had turned prosperous lands into a festering swamp, a terrible corruption was taking root. Long ago, before the ordering of the world, the Titans had established a research facility on Zandalar. Called Uldir, this underground complex was dedicated to studying the old gods and finding a way to eliminate them without destroying Azeroth. The Titan Keepers experimented on samples of old god tissue, dissecting the corruption in hopes of understanding its nature. The facility was state-of-the-art by Titan standards, equipped with containment systems and quarantine protocols that were supposed to prevent any corruption from escaping. The keepers who staffed Uldir were devoted to their mission, believing that they were doing important work that could someday free Azeroth from the old god's influence. They did not realize that their noble goals would lead to a horror beyond anything the old gods had ever produced. The experiments continued for eons, the keepers growing ever more confident in their understanding of the corruption they studied. They believed they had found patterns in the chaos, weaknesses that could be exploited. They pushed their research further and further, taking risks that their earlier, more cautious predecessors would never have approved. But their experiments went terribly wrong. In their attempts to understand the old gods, the Titans accidentally created something new, something that had never existed before. This creation was Gahun, an entity with the characteristics of an old god but lacking their cosmic origin. Gahun was pure rot and pestilence, decay incarnate, a parasite that could never stop consuming until everything was gone. Horrified by what they had made, the Titans sealed Gahun within Uldir, constructing 3 great seals to keep the creature imprisoned forever. The seals were placed in different locations across Zandalar, each protected by powerful guardians and wards. For countless millennia, the seals held, and Gahun remained trapped in its underground prison. But the blood trolls found Gahun. The blood trolls had once been ordinary Zandalari, citizens of the Empire who lived in Nazmir before the cataclysm transformed it into a swamp. When their homeland sank into the mire, when the ancient temples and cities disappeared beneath the murky waters, many of them lost faith in the traditional Loa. How could gods who had blessed the Zandalari for 16,000 years allow such destruction to befall their faithful servants? In their desperation, these lost souls wandered deeper into the swamps, seeking anything that could give them power and purpose. What they found was Gahun, and the blood god was only too happy to welcome new worshippers. When the cataclysm sank Nazmir into the swamps, it disturbed the ancient wards protecting one of the seals. A group of trolls who lived in the region discovered Uldir and the entity trapped within. They began to worship Gahun as a Loa, calling him the blood god and offering sacrifices to fuel his power. These blood trolls developed rituals based on Gahun's nature, using blood magic to perform dark miracles. They could drain the life force from their enemies, heal their own wounds, and even raise the dead to serve their master. Their society became entirely devoted to feeding Gahun, their cities decorated with bones and their altars slick with fresh blood. Prophet Zul saw in the blood trolls an opportunity. He had witnessed the Drakari in the frozen north sacrifice their own Loa to gain power during their war against the Scourge, and he had learned the rituals they had used. He realized that the same techniques could be applied to the Loa of Zandalar, draining their power to fuel mortal ambitions. In his darkest visions, Zul saw a future where the old Loa were overthrown, where Gahun rose as the supreme god of the trolls, where a new empire of blood and shadow ruled over all of Azeroth. He began to gather followers who shared his vision, quietly recruiting blood trolls and dissatisfied Zandalari to his cause. Among Zul's most important converts was Yasma, high priestess of the spider Loashadra. Yasma was ambitious and ruthless, her loyalty to her Loa outweighed only by her hunger for power. Zul taught her the secrets he had learned in Zuldrak, the rituals that could steal a Loa's essence and grant it to a mortal. She would become one of his most dangerous weapons in the war to come. The island of Zandalar was divided into 3 major regions, each with its own character and challenges. Zuldazar, the central region, was home to the great capital city and the Golden Throne from which Rastakhan ruled. Its jungles teemed with life, ancient dinosaurs roaming alongside the trolls who had hunted them for millennia. The temples and palaces of Zuldazar represented the height of Zandalari civilization, their golden spires a testament to thousands of years of accumulated wisdom and power. The Great Pyramid of Dazaralor dominated the skyline of Zuldazar, its stepped terraces rising higher than any other structure in the known world. Within its halls, the business of empire was conducted daily, merchants and diplomats mingling with priests and warriors. The palace complex included not only the throne room itself, but also the meeting chambers of the Zanchuli Council, the treasury where the wealth of ages was stored, and the private quarters of the royal family. The port of Zuldazar was the commercial heart of the empire, its docks constantly busy with ships from across Zandalar and beyond. Merchants traded in exotic goods from distant lands, while fishing boats brought in the bounty of the seas. The naval shipyards produced the great war vessels that had made the Zandalari fleet one of the most feared forces on the oceans, their golden prows cutting through the waves like sunlight through shadow. Beyond the city walls, the jungle of Zuldazar stretched in every direction. Ancient dinosaurs stalked through the undergrowth, some wild and dangerous, others domesticated and serving the Zandalari as beasts of burden or mounts for war. The temples of the major Loa were scattered throughout the region, each surrounded by communities of their devoted followers. Pilgrims traveled constantly between these holy sites, seeking blessings and wisdom from the spirits their ancestors had worshipped for 16,000 years. Nazmir, to the north, had once been equally prosperous. Before the cataclysm, it had been called the shining heart of Troll civilization, its cities and temples among the finest in all of Zandalar. But now it was a swamp, its ancient monuments slowly sinking into the mire, its population reduced to scattered survivors and the blood trolls who worshipped Gahun. The air was thick with disease and decay, the waters murky with corruption. The ruins of Nazmir's former glory could still be seen rising from the swamp, crumbling pyramids and toppled statues that spoke of the greatness that had been lost. Those Zandalari who still lived in the region clustered in small settlements on the highest ground, constantly vigilant against the blood trolls who lurked in the deeper swamps. The priests of Kragwa did what they could to hold back the corruption, but they were fighting a losing battle against an enemy that grew stronger with each passing day. The blood trolls had built their own dark cities in the heart of Nazmir, monuments to their god Gahun that were decorated with bones and constantly slick with fresh blood. Their raids against the remaining Zandalari settlements were brutal and frequent, their purpose not just to kill, but to capture victims for sacrifice. The screams of the dying echoed across the swamps at all hours, a constant reminder of the horror that had taken root in what had once been the heart of the empire. Voldun, to the west, was a vast desert that served as a place of exile for criminals and traitors. Those who displeased the Zandalari crown were sent to Voldun to survive or die, stripped of their names and their honor. The desert was merciless, its burning days and freezing nights claiming the lives of many who were unprepared for its challenges. Those who survived did so through sheer determination and the occasional mercy of the land's other inhabitants. The Sethrak, a race of serpent-like beings, had made their home in this harsh land, building temples to their own Loa Sethralis. Their civilization was ancient and sophisticated, their magic different from but not lesser than the power of the Zandalari Loa. The Sethrak were divided into factions, some willing to deal peacefully with outsiders, while others viewed all non-serpents as enemies to be destroyed. The Vulpera, a clever race of fox-like scavengers, also called Voldun home, trading with anyone willing to deal with them. They traveled the desert in caravans, their knowledge of hidden water, sources, and safe passages making them invaluable guides for those who wished to cross the deadly wastes. The Vulpera owed no allegiance to the Zandalari crown, but they had no quarrel with it either, preferring to maintain their independence while profiting from the needs of others. These three regions would all play important roles in the conflict that was about to engulf Zandalar. The political machinations of Zuldazar, the growing corruption of Nazmir, and the hidden dangers of Voldun would all come together in a storm that threatened to destroy the Zandalari Empire entirely. Princess Talanji had grown increasingly concerned about the state of the empire. She could see the cracks forming in the foundation of Zandalari society, the growing influence of Zul and his followers, the threat of Gahun and the blood trolls. She believed that the Zandalari could not face these challenges alone, that they needed allies from beyond their island. Talanji was young compared to her father, but she had inherited his intelligence and added to it a flexibility of mind that the older generation sometimes lacked. She had studied the history of the empire, including the failures as well as the successes. She knew that the alliance with the Mogu had ultimately brought nothing but trouble, that the attempts to conquer Pandaria had wasted lives and resources better spent elsewhere. But she also knew that isolation was no longer a viable strategy. The world had grown smaller since the days when Zandalar could ignore what happened beyond its shores. The Fourth War between the Alliance and Horde was reshaping the political landscape of Azeroth, and the Zandalari needed to choose their side before the choice was made for them. The Darkspear trolls intrigued her. These were members of her own race, distant cousins who had broken away from the mainstream of troll civilization and joined an alliance of misfits and outcasts. Yet they had thrived, contributing to the O's founding of a new horde and fighting in wars across multiple worlds. Perhaps the Zandalari could learn something from their example. Against the advice of the Zanchuli Council, Talanji left Zandalar to seek help from the Horde. She knew that the Darkspear trolls were members of this faction, and despite their refusal to join Zul's alliance, she believed they might be willing to aid their Zandalari cousins in a time of genuine need. The Horde was powerful, battle-hardened, and most importantly, it offered the Zandalari something they desperately needed: friends. But Talanji's journey did not go as planned. Her ship was intercepted by Alliance forces, and she was captured along with Prophet Zul, who had been traveling with her for reasons of his own. They were taken to Stormwind and imprisoned in the stockade, accused of crimes against the Alliance. The Horde could not ignore the capture of Zandalari royalty, especially not when one of their potential allies was involved. Warchief Sylvanas Windrunner ordered a strike team to infiltrate Stormwind and rescue the prisoners. Rokon of the Darkspear tribe led the mission, his experience and skill proving crucial in navigating the heavily defended city. The rescue was successful, though costly. Several Horde operatives fell during the infiltration of Stormwind, their lives sacrificed to free Talanji and Zul. The princess would never forget this debt, the blood that had been shed on her behalf by trolls and orcs she had never met. It gave her a personal connection to the Horde that went beyond mere political calculation. Talanji and Zul were brought safely to Orgrimmar, the capital of the Horde. For Talanji, it was her first experience of a city built by races other than trolls, and she found it fascinating. The orcs had constructed their capital from red stone and iron, creating a stark aesthetic, very different from the golden elegance of Zuldazar. Yet there was a vitality to Orgrimmar that she found appealing, an energy born of constant struggle and hard-won victory. She met with War Chief Sylvanas Windrunner and other leaders of the Horde, presenting her case for an alliance. The Zandalari Empire was ancient and powerful, she argued, and its navy could tip the balance in the ongoing war against the Alliance. In return, she needed the Horde's help to deal with the threats facing her homeland, the blood trolls, G'huun, and the treacherous elements within her own court. The Horde leadership was receptive, and Talanji returned to Zandalar bearing news of what she had experienced and a new proposal for an alliance between the Zandalari Empire and the Horde. King Rastakhan received his daughter's proposal with mixed feelings. He was proud of her initiative, but wary of entangling the Empire in foreign wars. The Zandalari had survived for 16,000 years by keeping to themselves, and he saw no reason to change that approach now. But he agreed to allow Horde emissaries to come to Zuldazar to hear their proposals and consider their offers. What no one realized was that Zul had used his time in captivity to finalize his plans. The prophet had never truly been a prisoner, his visions and his agents keeping him informed of everything that was happening across the world. His rescue by the Horde was simply a convenient means of returning home, where he could put his ultimate scheme into motion. During his time in the stockade, Zul had communed with forces beyond the understanding of his captors. He had seen visions of G'huun's rise, of the blood that would flow through the streets of Zuldazar, of the new order that would emerge from the chaos. He had coordinated with the blood trolls in Nazmir and the traitors he had planted within the Zandalari court. Everything was ready. Zul returned to Zandalar with a smile on his face and treachery in his heart. He resumed his place on the Zanchuli Council, acting as if nothing had changed, advising the king on matters both spiritual and political as he had done for decades. Rastakhan, though wary of his prophet, had no concrete evidence of betrayal. The king did not realize that the clock was ticking, that the calm before the storm was about to end, that his own trusted advisor was carefully counting down the days until he would strike. Zul's betrayal came without warning. One moment, he was attending a meeting of the Zanchuli Council. The next, he was ordering his followers to attack. Blood trolls surged through the streets of Zuldazar, their dark magic overwhelming the unprepared defenders. The attack came from multiple directions at once, the careful planning of years of preparation evident in the precision of the assault. Loyal Zandalari warriors found themselves facing not just blood trolls, but their own former comrades, trolls who had secretly pledged themselves to Zul's cause. The fighting was chaotic and brutal, the sounds of battle echoing through streets that had known peace for centuries. Civilians fled in terror as the coup unfolded. The golden city that had stood since the time of King Dazar suddenly transformed into a battlefield. Zul himself confronted Rastakhan in the throne room, the prophet finally revealing the depths of his treachery. He spoke of his visions, of the future he had seen where the old Loa were overthrown and a new order rose in their place. He told Rastakhan that the king had grown weak, too attached to traditions that no longer served the empire. The time had come for new leadership, new gods, and a new purpose for the Zandalari people. Rastakhan listened to his old friend's words with growing horror. He had trusted Zul for decades, relying on his prophecies to guide the Empire through crisis after crisis. And all that time, the prophet had been working toward this moment, gathering followers and making plans that would tear the Empire apart. The battle was fierce and desperate. Rastakhan fought with all the power Rezin had granted him, but Zul had been preparing for this moment for years. The prophet's followers outnumbered the king's loyalists, and they had the advantage of surprise. Rastakhan was gravely wounded and would have been killed if not for the intervention of Paku, the Pterodax Loa, who swept down and carried the stricken king to safety. With Rastakhan unconscious and near death, Bwonsamdi sensed an opportunity. The Loa of Death appeared to claim the king's soul, as was his right, but Talanji and her allies contacted Rezan, the Loa of Kings, who forced Bwonsamdi to release his claim. Rastakhan was brought back from the brink of death, but his ordeal was far from over. The respite was temporary. Zul's forces attacked the temple of Rezan on Mount Mugamba, seeking to drain the Loa of Kings of his power, just as the Drakari had done to their Loa centuries before. Rastakhan himself led the counterattack, fighting alongside Horde champions to save the Loa who had blessed him for so long. They arrived too late. Zul's follower Vilnakdor had already begun the ritual, draining Rezan's essence. Though the adventurers managed to kill Vilnakdor and disrupt the ritual, the damage was done. Rezan was mortally wounded, his power fading rapidly. In his dying moments, Rezan turned to Rastakhan, the Loa who had blessed him for centuries, who had granted him long life and supernatural strength, had one final gift to give. Rezan poured the last of his essence into the king, giving Rastakhan the power he would need to face the challenges ahead. Then the Loa of Kings was gone, his death marking the end of an era that had lasted since the founding of the Zandalari Empire. The death of Rezan sent shockwaves through Zandalari society. The Loa of Kings had been the spiritual center of the empire since its founding, his blessing the source of the monarchy's legitimacy. Without him, the very nature of kingship among the Zandalari would have to change. The prelates, those holy warriors who had drawn their power directly from Rezan, found themselves cut off from their source of strength. Throughout Zuldazar, the faithful mourned. Temples that had been dedicated to Rezan stood empty, their priests uncertain of their purpose. The great devil Sor Loa had been more than just a god to the Zandalari. He had been a symbol of everything they believed about leadership, strength, and the divine right of their rulers. His loss left a void that nothing could fill. For Rastakhan, the death of Rezan was both a personal tragedy and a political crisis. He had been blessed by the Loa of Kings for over 200 years, his long life and supernatural power entirely dependent on that blessing. Without it, he was just an old troll, suddenly feeling the weight of centuries that had been held at bay. With Rezan dead, the blessing that had sustained Rastakhan began to fade. The king felt his age for the first time in centuries, his body beginning to fail as the years caught up with him. More importantly, Bwonsamdi's claim on his soul was no longer held at bay. The Loa of Death would come for him eventually, and this time there would be no Rezan to intervene. Rastakhan knew he had only one choice if he wanted to save his people. He sought out Bwonsamdi and made a bargain. If Bwonsamdi would grant him the power to defeat Zul and save Zandalar, then Rastakhan would elevate Bwonsamdi above all other Loa in the Zandalari pantheon. The Loa of Death agreed, but on one condition. Rastakhan's entire bloodline would be devoted to Bwonsamdi, serving him in life and in death forever. It was a terrible price, one that Rastakhan had no right to impose on his daughter without her consent. But he saw no other option. Zul's forces were at the gates, Gahun was rising in Nazmir, and the empire was on the brink of destruction. Rastakhan accepted Bwonsamdi's terms, binding his line to the Loa of Death for all eternity. With Bwonsamdi's power flowing through him, Rastakhan led the counterattack against Zul. The final battle took place on the steps of the palace itself, as Zul's forces attempted to breach the Great Seal that kept Gahun imprisoned in Uldir. Alongside him fought the Horde champions, who had come to Zandalar's aid, their strength adding to his own. The fighting was brutal and desperate. Zul commanded powerful blood magic, his followers willing to sacrifice themselves to fuel his dark abilities. But Rastakhan had the blessing of Bwonsamdi now, and the Loa of Death's power proved equal to anything Zul could bring to bear. In the end, Rastakhan cornered Zul near the Great Seal. The prophet was wounded, his plans in ruins, his followers dead or scattered. But even in defeat, Zul managed a final act of defiance. His servant Mithrax, a powerful Seathrax that Zul had somehow awakened and bound to his will, succeeded in destroying the Great Seal. Zul laughed even as Rastakhan prepared to strike him down. He told the king to enjoy ruling over a kingdom of ashes, for Gahun would soon be free. Then Rastakhan shoved Zul off the ledge, sending the prophet tumbling into the flames below. But death was not the end for Zul. Gahun reached out from its prison and resurrected the prophet, raising him as an undead servant. Zul became one of the bosses within Uldir itself, fighting against the adventurers who came to destroy Gahun. In the end, he was struck down again, his last words a bitter complaint that this was not the future he had been promised. With the Great Seal broken, Gahun began to stir in earnest. The blood god's influence spread across Nazmir, corrupting everything it touched. The blood trolls launched attacks on the other regions of Zandalar, their numbers swelled by converts and raised dead. If Gahun was not stopped, it would eventually break free from Uldir entirely and consume the entire world. An expedition was assembled to venture into Uldir and destroy Gahun before it could escape. Princess Talanji led the Zandalari contingent, accompanied by Bran Bronzebeard of the Explorers League and champions from both the Horde and Alliance. They would have to fight their way through the corrupted facility, overcoming the ancient guardians and Gahun's servants before confronting the blood god itself. The journey through Uldir was harrowing. The facility was a maze of Titan technology corrupted by eons of Gahun's influence. The expedition encountered bizarre creatures spawned from old god experimentation, constructs that had been warped by corruption, and the reanimated corpse of Zul himself. Each challenge was more terrible than the last, but the adventurers pressed on. The first boss they encountered was Talok, the Uldir elevator boss, a corrupted construct that had once served as the facility's guardian. Its massive form blocked the path deeper into Uldir, and it attacked with the mindless fury of a machine that had lost all sense of its original purpose. The battle was fierce, but the adventurers prevailed, opening the way to the deeper chambers. Mother, the matron of tenacity and hope for Uldir research, still maintained some semblance of her original programming. She was designed to contain and study old god corruption, and she tested the adventurers to ensure they were capable of facing what lay ahead. Only those who passed her trials were permitted to proceed. The expedition faced Fetid Devourer, a massive creature that had been spawned from the combination of all the organic waste Gahun's experiments had produced. Vectus, a colony of parasites that carried every disease that had been developed in Uldir's laboratories. Zekvoz, a herald of the void who had been imprisoned in Uldir for experiments but had now broken free. Each encounter pushed the adventurers to their limits, testing their courage and their skill. The reanimated Zul proved to be one of the most dangerous foes. The prophet had been transformed by Gahun's power, his body twisted into something barely recognizable. He wielded dark magic with even greater potency than he had in life, and he was driven by a hatred that transcended death. Defeating him was necessary to reach Gahun's chamber, and the battle was brutal. Finally, the expedition reached the containment chamber where Mithrax, the Unraveler, the Seathrax that had served Zul, stood guard over the final seal. This ancient horror had to be destroyed before the adventurers could confront Gahun itself. In the heart of Uldir, they found Gahun. The blood god was a mass of writhing corruption, a being of pure entropy that existed only to consume and destroy. It had been sealed away for so long that it had grown beyond anything the Titans had anticipated, its hunger magnified by millennia of imprisonment. The battle against Gahun was unlike anything the adventurers had faced before. The blood god's power was immense, its corruption capable of overwhelming even the strongest defenses. But Uldir still contained one weapon capable of defeating it: the re-origination drive, a device designed by the Titans to purge corruption at the cost of all life in the affected area. The expedition managed to activate the re-origination drive, directing its power at Gahun while shielding themselves from its effects. The blood god's form began to dissolve under the assault, its accumulated power draining away as the Titan device did its work. In its final moments, Gahun lashed out at its attackers with all its remaining strength, but it was not enough. Gahun, the accidental old god, the blood god of the blood trolls, was destroyed. Its corruption began to recede from Nazmir almost immediately, the land slowly beginning to heal from the damage that had been done. The blood trolls who had worshipped Gahun found themselves cut off from their power source, their dark magic fading without the blood god to sustain it. The victory was complete, but the cost had been high. Many brave Zandalari and Horde warriors had fallen in the fighting, their lives given to protect the world from a threat that most people would never even know had existed. King Rastakhan honored the fallen with great ceremonies, proclaiming them heroes of the Empire. The defeat of Gahun should have marked the beginning of a new era of peace for Zandalar. The greatest threats to the Empire had been eliminated, the traitors punished, and the alliance with the Horde cemented through shared struggle. Princess Talanji's vision of a Zandalari Empire connected to the wider world seemed to be coming true. The Zandalari people began the work of rebuilding. The blood trolls, now cut off from Gahun's power, were being pushed back into the deepest swamps of Nazmir. The corruption that had spread across the region was slowly being cleansed, the land beginning to recover from the damage that had been done. Plans were made to restore the ancient monuments that had sunk into the mire, to rebuild the cities and temples that had been the pride of Nazmir before the cataclysm. In Zuldazar, The scars of Zul's betrayal were being healed. Buildings that had been damaged in the fighting were repaired, and the dead were honored with proper ceremonies. The Zanchuli Council, purged of those who had sided with the traitor, began meeting again to advise the throne. Life was returning to normal, or as close to normal as was possible after such upheaval. King Rastakhan threw himself into the work of recovery, determined to restore his empire to its former glory. Despite the bargain he had made with Bwonsamdi, despite the loss of Rezan's blessing, he remained a powerful and effective ruler. His people loved him for standing against Zul, for fighting to protect them when the prophet had tried to destroy everything they held dear. But the peace would not last. The war between the Horde and Alliance had reached a fever pitch. The burning of Teldrassil and the siege of Lord Aeron had inflamed tensions to the breaking point, and both sides were looking for any advantage they could find. The Alliance saw the Zandalari fleet as a potential threat, a naval force that could tip the balance of power decisively in the Horde's favor. High King Anduin Wrynn authorized a bold plan. Alliance forces would attack Dazar'alor while the Zandalari were distracted, destroying their fleet before it could be used against the Alliance. Jaina Proudmoore, who had recently returned to the Alliance after years of absence, would lead the assault from her enchanted ship. The attack came without warning. Alliance forces had created a diversion, drawing the Horde and Zandalari armies into the swamps of Nazmir on a false report of blood troll activity. The deception was masterful, exploiting the Zandalari's fears about a resurgence of the blood troll threat. While the defenders were away, the Alliance struck. The assault began at dawn, when the morning mists still clung to the harbor of Zuldazar. Jaina's enchanted ship led the naval assault, its magically enhanced cannons tearing through the Zandalari vessels anchored in the harbor. The pride of the Zandalari navy, ships that had sailed the seas for generations, were reduced to burning wrecks in a matter of minutes. The flames reflected off the golden spires of Dazar'alor, a terrible contrast between the beauty of the city and the destruction being wrought upon it. Alliance soldiers stormed the docks and began fighting their way toward the palace. They had studied the layout of the city, knew its streets and defenses, and moved with the precision of a well-trained military force. Kultiran Marines and Stormwind infantry advanced side by side, supported by mages and priests whose magic carved paths through the desperate defenders. The Zandalari who had remained in the city fought with the courage of their ancestors, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The prelates who had not marched to Nazmir formed the core of the defense, their holy power blazing as they held choke points against the advancing alliance. Many fell, their blessed armor stained with blood, their final prayers to the fallen Rezan going unanswered. Talanji received word of the attack while still deep in the Nazmir swamps. The messenger arrived on a pterodax, its rider wounded and barely conscious, bearing the terrible news that the capital was under assault. Talanji immediately began the journey back, her heart racing with fear and fury, but she knew she would not arrive in time to save the city. The best she could hope for was to limit the damage and rescue as many of her people as possible. King Rastakhan chose to face the alliance himself. He was old now, the years that Rezan's blessing had held at bay finally catching up with him. But Bwonsamdi's power still flowed through his veins, and he would not abandon his people in their hour of need. The Alliance forces fought their way to the throne room where Rastakhan awaited them. Jaina Proudmoore and Gen Greymane offered the king a chance to surrender, to end the bloodshed peacefully. They had achieved their primary objective of destroying the Zandalari fleet, they said. There was no need for further violence. Rastakhan refused. He would not bow to those who had attacked his city, murdered his people, and sought to dictate terms to the Zandalari Empire. His ancestors had ruled from this throne for 16,000 years, and he would not be the one to surrender it. The Zandalari would endure long after the alliance had crumbled to dust. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. Rastakhan fought with all the power Bwonsamdi had granted him, summoning the spirits of the dead to fight alongside him. He pushed the Alliance champions back again and again, his strength seemingly inexhaustible. But even Bwonsamdi's blessing had its limits. The Alliance heroes were too numerous, too powerful, and too determined. One by one, Rastakhan's defenses fell. A final blow struck him down, and the king of the Zandalari Empire fell before his own throne. Talanji arrived moments later, too late to save her father, but in time to drive off the remaining Alliance forces. She knelt beside Rastakhan's body, her grief overwhelming. The king who had ruled for over 200 years, the father who had raised her and loved her despite their disagreements, was gone. The Alliance had achieved a tactical victory, destroying the Zandalari fleet and killing the king, but their strategic goal had failed utterly. They had hoped that the attack would drive a wedge between the Zandalari and the Horde, demonstrating that the Horde was too weak to protect its allies. Instead, they had only united the trolls more firmly behind the Horde. Rastakhan had died a hero, defending his people against a treacherous attack. His sacrifice would not be forgotten or forgiven. When Talanji rose from her father's body, she did so as the new queen of the Zandalari Empire, and her first act as queen would be to formalize the alliance with the Horde that her father had hesitated to complete. The coronation of Queen Talanji was a solemn affair, overshadowed by grief, but also marked by determination. The ceremony took place in the great temple atop Dazaralor, where the kings and queens of Zandalar had been crowned for 16,000 years. The halls were draped in mourning colors, but among the darkness gleamed the gold that had always symbolized the Zandalari Empire's endurance. The high priests of each major Loa came forward to offer their blessings to the new queen. Paku sent her pterodax to circle above the temple, a sign of the wind Loa's favor. Gong's followers performed the traditional dances that honored their patron. Even Bwonsamdi, whose relationship with the throne was now more complicated than ever, sent his blessing through his priests. The Zandalari people gathered in the streets of Zuldazar to witness the crowning of their new monarch, their cheers mixing with their tears. Talanji had proven herself during the crisis with Zul and Gahun, and the people trusted her to lead them through the dark days ahead. Many remembered her courage in traveling to seek the Horde's aid, her wisdom in seeing the danger that her father had been reluctant to acknowledge. She was young, but she had the strength of her ancestors. When the crown was placed upon Talanji's brow, a hush fell over the assembled throng. For a moment, there was only silence, the weight of 16,000 years of history pressing down upon the young queen. Then Talanji raised her head, and her voice rang out across the city, strong and clear despite her grief. She swore to protect her people, to honor their traditions while leading them forward, to avenge her father's death and ensure that his sacrifice was not in vain. The crowd erupted in cheers. Zandalar had a new queen, and though the road ahead was uncertain, the empire would endure. Unlike her father, Talanji did not have Razan's blessing. The Loa of Kings was dead, killed by Zul's treachery, and his power died with him. But Talanji was still bound by her father's bargain with Bwonsamdi, her bloodline devoted to the Loa of Death for all eternity. She would have to navigate her relationship with Bwonsamdi carefully, accepting his guidance without being controlled by his agenda. Talanji's first major act as queen was to formally petition for the Zandalari Empire to join the Horde. Despite the losses they had suffered, despite the destruction of their fleet, she believed that alliance was still the best path forward for her people. The Horde Council, which had replaced Sylvanas Windrunner as the leadership of the Horde, accepted the petition. For the first time in the history of the Horde, 4 troll tribes were united under a single banner. The Darkspear, who had been members since the founding of the new Horde under Thrall, the Reventusk, a forest troll tribe that had allied with the Horde during the Third War, the Shatterspear, a small tribe that had joined during the Cataclysm, and now the Zandalari, the greatest and oldest of all troll nations, bringing their wisdom and power to the cause. The admission of the Zandalari to the Horde was celebrated across the faction's territories. Trolls, who had been scattered across Azeroth for millennia, were now united, their ancient heritage acknowledged by their membership in the same coalition. The Darkspear in particular took pride in seeing their Zandalari cousins finally join them, proof that the bonds of blood could overcome even 16,000 years of separation. For the Zandalari, membership in the Horde represented a fundamental shift in their worldview. They had always considered themselves separate from and superior to the other peoples of Azeroth, the oldest and greatest civilization in the world. Now they were equals, partners in a coalition that included orcs and Tauren, blood elves, and forsaken trolls of every tribe and goblins with their endless schemes. Some among the Zandalari struggled with this new reality. They had been raised to believe in Zandalari exceptionalism, in the unique destiny of their people as the chosen servants of the Loa. To admit that they needed allies, that they could not stand alone against the threats facing Azeroth, was difficult for their pride to accept. But Queen Talanji led by example. She treated the other leaders of the Horde as equals, respecting their wisdom, even when it differed from Zandalari tradition. She sent ambassadors to learn the customs of each Horde nation, and she welcomed ambassadors in return, eager to understand the peoples who were now her allies. Talanji also began to reform the Zandalari Empire itself. For the first time in 16,000 years, she appointed a non-troll to the Zanchuli Council, a Tortolan sage whose wisdom she valued. She opened the ports of Zandalar to trade with other Horde nations, ending centuries of isolation. She encouraged her people to look outward, to learn from the other races of Azeroth, even as they shared their own knowledge. Not everyone was pleased with these changes. The more conservative elements of Zandalari society grumbled that Talanji was moving too fast, abandoning the traditions that had sustained them for millennia. But most recognized that the old ways had nearly led to the Empire's destruction. Zul had been a traditionalist, a prophet who claimed to speak for the ancient ways, and his treachery had killed thousands. Talanji's grudge against the alliance, particularly Jaina Proudmoore, remained a source of tension. When the opportunity arose to make peace with the alliance and end the Fourth War, Talanji was initially resistant. She blamed Jaina for her father's death and was unwilling to forgive or forget. The memory of her father lying dead before his own throne haunted her dreams, and she knew that Jaina had been among those who struck him down. But Talanji was also a pragmatic leader, one who understood that personal vengeance could not be allowed to outweigh the needs of her people. The Fourth War was devastating Azeroth, and the true threat facing the world was not the Alliance, but the cosmic forces that sought to unmake creation itself. Old god corruption, the schemes of the Void Lords, the ongoing threat of the Burning Legion, all of these required the mortal races to work together rather than destroy each other. After much agonizing deliberation, consulting with her advisors on the Zanchuli Council, and seeking guidance from the LOA themselves, Talanji made the difficult decision to support peace. She would not forgive the Alliance for what they had done, but she would accept an armistice for the sake of her people and the world. The grudge remained, banked like coals that could be fanned into flame at any moment. But for now, the Zandalari Empire would focus on healing rather than vengeance. The peace was uneasy, but it held. The Zandalari began the long process of rebuilding their fleet, knowing that they would need it to project power across the seas. The shipyards of Zuldazar worked day and night, craftsmen applying techniques that had been perfected over 16,000 years to construct vessels that could rival any navy on Azeroth. The new ships were even more formidable than those the Alliance had destroyed, incorporating lessons learned from the defeat and innovations suggested by their Horde allies. The work to cleanse Nazmir of the remaining corruption from Gahun proceeded slowly but steadily. Priests of Kragwa led the effort, using their healing magic to purify the tainted waters and restore life to the blighted land. It would take generations for Nazmir to fully recover, but with each passing month, more of the region became habitable again. Refugees who had fled during the Blood Troll attacks began to return, rebuilding their homes on land that their ancestors had inhabited for millennia. The restoration of the ancient monuments of Nazmir became a matter of national pride. Teams of craftsmen worked to raise temples and pyramids that had sunk into the swamp to restore the glory that had been lost during the cataclysm and its aftermath. The project would take decades, perhaps centuries, but the Zandalari were accustomed to thinking in long time frames. What mattered was that the work had begun, that the healing process was underway. Throughout all of this, the Zandalari honored their alliance with the Horde while maintaining their own identity as the oldest empire in the world. In the realm of death, King Rastakhan found himself in the care of Bonsamdi. The other side, Bonsamdi's domain, was unlike any realm the former king had ever experienced. It was a place of twilight and shadow, where the souls of departed trolls wandered through eternal groves and ancient temples that existed only in spirit. Here, the dead found peace or torment, according to the bargains they had made in life and the service they had rendered to the Loa. The Loa of Death had claimed Rastakhan's soul as the bargain demanded, but he treated the former king with respect. Rastakhan had honored his word, elevating Bwonsamdi above all other Loa and binding his bloodline to the Loa of Death. Such loyalty deserved recognition. Bwonsamdi gave Rastakhan a place of honor in the other side, allowing him to watch over the souls of his ancestors and those who had served him faithfully in life. Yet even in death, Rastakhan could not escape his responsibilities. The bargain he had made extended beyond his own soul, binding his daughter Talanji and all her descendants to Bwonsamdi's service. From the other side, Rastakhan watched as Talanji struggled with the weight of this inheritance, knowing that he was the one who had placed it upon her shoulders. The guilt of that decision followed him even beyond the grave. When the Shadowlands crisis threatened to consume all of death itself, Bwonsamdi found his power severely diminished. The jailer's machinations had disrupted the natural order of death, and souls were being drawn into the maw instead of going to their proper afterlives. Bwonsamdi, like all the death-related powers of Azeroth, was being drained of the anima that sustained him. Talanji journeyed to the other side, Bwonsamdi's realm, to aid the Loa of Death in his struggle. She found that her father's soul was still there, protected by Bwonsamdi, even as the Loa's own power waned. The reunion between father and daughter was bittersweet, for Rastakhan could not truly return to the living world. With Talanji's help, Bwonsamdi was able to restore some of his lost power. He continued to guard the souls of the trolls who had died, keeping them safe from the maw's hunger, and he spared enough of his strength to allow Rastakhan one final meeting with his daughter. Rastakhan told Talanji that he was proud of her, proud of the queen she had become. He had watched from the other side as she led the Empire through crisis after crisis, and he knew that Zandalar was in good hands. He encouraged her to continue on her path, to be the ruler that the Zandalari needed, even if it meant breaking with tradition. As Bwonsamdi took Rastakhan back under his care, the former king had one final piece of advice for his daughter. She must remember that she was the queen Zandalar deserved, and she must be brave. Then he was gone, returning to whatever afterlife awaited the servants of the Loa of Death. Talanji returned to the living world with renewed determination. Her father's blessing, given from beyond the grave, strengthened her resolve to lead the Zandalari into a new era. She would honor his memory by being the best queen she could be, for her people and for the world. The journey to the other side had changed Talanji in ways that were difficult to articulate. She had seen firsthand the realm that awaited her and all her descendants, the domain of Bwonsamdi, where her bloodline was now bound to serve forever. It was not a frightening place exactly, but it was different from the afterlives that the followers of other Loa expected. The servants of Rezan had believed they would join the Loa of Kings in eternal glory. The servants of Gonk looked forward to endless hunts in spirit jungles. But the servants of Bwonsamdi belonged to him, and that was both a blessing and a responsibility. Talanji also understood now that her relationship with Bwonsamdi was not simply one of servitude. The Loa of Death needed her as much as she needed him. The bargain her father had made had elevated Bwonsamdi to the highest position in the Zandalari pantheon, but maintaining that position required the active support of the throne. If Talanji turned against Bwonsamdi, if she encouraged her people to abandon his worship, the Loa of Death would lose much of the power he had gained. They were partners in a sense, bound together by mutual interest as well as mystical obligation. This understanding gave Talanji confidence in her dealings with Bwonsamdi. She would honor her father's bargain, would serve the Loa of Death as was required, but she would not allow him to manipulate or control her. She was the queen of the Zandalari Empire, and her first loyalty was to her people. Bwonsamdi would have to accept that or face the consequences. The Zandalari Empire endures 16,000 years of history, of kings and queens, of wars and triumphs, of Loa and legends, and still the golden spires of Zuldazar reach toward the heavens. The trolls who first settled the Zandalar Mountains could never have imagined what their descendants would build, the civilization that would arise from their crude shrines and simple camps. From those humble beginnings emerged the greatest and most enduring empire in the history of Azeroth, a nation that has outlasted all others and continues to shape the destiny of the world. The history of the Zandalari is, in many ways, the history of Azeroth itself. They were present at the dawn of mortal civilization, building their temples while other races still huddled in caves. They fought the Aqir when the insectoid hordes threatened to consume all life on the planet. They witnessed the rise of the Night Elves and the fall of the Black Empire, the sundering of the world, and the creation of the modern continents. Through it all, the Zandalari endured, their culture and their faith remaining constant even as the world changed beyond recognition around them. The secret of the Zandalari's longevity lies in their unique combination of tradition and adaptation. They have preserved the core elements of their culture, the worship of the Loa, and the reverence for their ancestors, across 16,000 years of history, yet they have also proven capable of changing when necessary, adopting new ideas and new approaches when the old ways no longer served them. This balance between preservation and innovation has allowed them to weather storms that destroyed countless other civilizations. The Empire has survived the Aqir War, when insectoid horrors threatened to exterminate all of Trollkind. It has survived the Sundering, when the world itself was torn apart and their homeland became an island in an endless sea. It has survived the rise and fall of 100 other nations, watching as empires that seemed eternal crumbled to dust while the Zandalari remained. It has survived the cataclysm and the treachery of Zul. It has survived the rise of Gahun and the assault of the Alliance. It has survived the death of King Rastakhan and the transition to Queen Talanji's rule. Through it all, the Zandalari have adapted and endured, their ancient traditions evolving to meet new challenges, while the core of their culture remained unchanged. The Loa still dwell in the mountains and jungles of Zandalar, their power undiminished by the passage of ages. Bwonsamdi tends the souls of the departed, guiding them to their rest in the other side. Gonk teaches the ways of the shapeshifter to those with the talent to learn. Paku carries her followers on the winds, her pterodactyls spiraling through the clouds above Zuldazar. The prelates still guard the faith, even though Rezan is gone. They have adapted their traditions to honor the memory of the Loa of Kings, while acknowledging that his power can no longer sustain them. Some have turned to other Loa, while others seek to embody Rezan's virtues through their own strength of will. The order endures, as the Zandalari themselves endure. The Zanchuli Council still advises the throne, its membership changed, but its purpose unchanged. The high priests of the major Loa still debate matters of faith and politics, their wisdom helping to guide the empire through an uncertain future. The prophets still receive visions, though they are more careful now about who they share them with, wary of another Zul rising to twist the gift of foresight to treasonous ends. The scars of Zul's betrayal have not fully healed. Many families lost members to the fighting, either to the blood trolls who served the traitor or to the alliance assault that followed. The temples of Zuldazar still bear marks of battle damage, though craftsmen work daily to restore them to their former glory. The loss of Razan, the Loa of Kings, has left a void in Zandalari spirituality that may take generations to fill. Yet the Zandalari endure. They have always endured. The challenges they face today are severe, but they are not the first severe challenges that the Empire has overcome. The Aqir War was worse. The Sundering was worse. The rise of Hakar and the threat of Gahun were at least as dangerous. Each time, the Zandalari adapted, survived, and emerged to continue their 16,000-year history. And Queen Talanji still rules from the Golden Throne, her father's crown upon her brow and her own vision guiding her hand. She has proven herself worthy of the throne through trial after trial, and the people love her for it. She is not Rastakhan, and she does not try to be. She is her own monarch, with her own style and her own priorities. Under her leadership, the Zandalari are no longer isolated. They trade with the other members of the Horde, exchanging goods and knowledge across the vast distances that separate them. Zandalari scholars travel to Orgrimmar and Thunder Bluff, to Silvermoon and the Undercity's remnants, learning about the other cultures that share their faction. In return, scholars from across the Horde come to Zuldazar to study the ancient lore that the Zandalari have preserved for millennia. The Zandalari have much to offer their new allies. Their 16,000 years of recorded history contain wisdom on subjects ranging from agriculture to warfare, from medicine to spiritual practice. Their craftsmen create works of art that are prized throughout the Horde, golden treasures that fetch high prices in markets from Orgrimmar to Silvermoon. Their priests can commune with spirits and heal wounds that would confound any healer not trained in their traditions. But the Zandalari are also learning from their allies. The Tauren have taught them new approaches to living in harmony with the natural world, perspectives that complement rather than contradict the teachings of the Loa. The Blood Elves have shared their knowledge of arcane magic, a school that the Zandalari had always viewed with suspicion but now see potential in. Even the goblins, with their crass commercialism and obsession with profit, have provided insights into trade and diplomacy that the traditionally isolated Zandalari find valuable. The children of Zandalar grow up in a world very different from that of their parents. They learn not just the traditional prayers to the Loas, but also about the wider world beyond their island shores. They hear stories, not just of King Dazar and the Aqir War, but also of the founding of the Horde and the battles against the Burning Legion. They are still Zandalari, still devoted to their Loa and proud of their heritage, but they are also citizens of a larger community that spans Azeroth. The future is uncertain, as it always is. New threats will arise. New challenges will test the Empire's strength. The relationship with Bwonsamdi will require careful management, the Loa of Death's demands balanced against the needs of the living. The scars left by the Fourth War will take time to heal, and the grudge against the Alliance remains fresh in many hearts. But the Zandalari have faced uncertainty before. They have faced threats that seemed insurmountable and challenges that appeared impossible. They have always found a way through, adapting and surviving as they have done since King Dazar first led his people up the slopes of the sacred mountains. The golden spires of Zuldazar catch the light of the setting sun, their peaks gleaming like flames against the darkening sky. The temple bells ring out across the city, calling the faithful to evening prayers. The Loa stir in their sacred places, their presence a comfort to those who worship them. And the trolls of Zandalar go about their lives, secure in the knowledge that their empire will endure. So say the Loa, so go the Zandalari. The empire stands at a crossroads, as it has stood at so many crossroads throughout its long history. The choices made by Queen Talanji and her advisors in the coming years will determine whether the Zandalari continue as they always have, proud and enduring, or whether they transform into something new, something that incorporates the lessons learned from 16,000 years of history and the wisdom gained from their new allies. Whatever path they choose, the essential nature of the Zandalari will remain unchanged. They are a people of faith, devoted to the Loa who have blessed them since the earliest days. They are a people of pride, confident in their place as the founders of the oldest civilization in Azeroth. They are a people of resilience, capable of surviving disasters that would destroy any other nation. And they are a people of hope, looking forward to a future that stretches beyond the horizon, a future in which the golden spires of Zuldazar will continue to gleam beneath the eternal sky. And so we come to the end of our tale, the complete story of the Zandalari, from the earliest days of Azeroth to the present. It has been a story of faith and betrayal, of mighty kings and treacherous prophets, of ancient gods and enduring traditions. It has been the story of a people who have watched the world change around them while remaining true to their own nature. We have traveled through 16,000 years of history, from the Ar's first crude shrines on the slopes of the Zandalar Mountains to the gleaming palaces of modern Zuldazar. We have witnessed the rise of King Dazar and the founding of the Empire, the terrible war against the Aqir, and the formation of the Empire of Zul. We have seen the alliance with the Mogu and the failure in Pandaria, the sundering of the world, and the transformation of Zandalar into an island nation. We have explored the complex relationship between the Zandalari and their Loa, the wild gods who have blessed and guided them since the earliest days of their civilization. We have met Rezan, the Loa of Kings, Paku, the Master of Winds, Gonk, the Lord of the Pack, and Kragwa, the Great Frog. We have delved into the mysteries of Bwonsamdi, the Loa of Death, whose bargains and arrangements shape the fates of all who come into contact with him. We have witnessed the rise and fall of threats to the Empire, from Aqir the Soul Flayer to Gahun the Blood God. We have seen the treachery of Prophet Zul and the courage of those who stood against him. We have mourned the death of King Rastakhan and celebrated the rise of Queen Talanji, watching as the Zandalari Empire entered a new era of alliance and adaptation. Now let the images of Zandalar remain with you as you drift toward sleep. The golden pyramids of Zuldazar rising from the jungle canopy like mountains of precious metal. The sacred peaks of the Zandalar Mountains, home to the Loa who have blessed the trolls for 16,000 years. the endless ocean that surrounds the island, its waves lapping gently against shores that have endured since before the Sundering. Imagine yourself walking through the streets of Zuldazar at twilight, the last rays of the sun painting the golden temples in shades of amber and rose. The air is warm and fragrant with the scent of jungle flowers and ceremonial incense. The sounds of the city wash over you, soft and peaceful. The distant chanting of priests at evening prayer, the gentle splash of fountains in temple courtyards, the quiet footsteps of trolls making their way home after a day's work. You climb the great stairs of the royal pyramid, each step bringing you higher above the jungle canopy. The view expands around you, revealing the full majesty of Zandalar, the sacred mountains rising in the distance, the dense jungle stretching to the horizon, the gleaming ocean that surrounds this ancient island. Here, at the heart of the world's oldest empire, you feel connected to something vast and eternal. The Loa watch over this land, as they have for 16,000 years, their presence a comfort and a blessing. You can feel their power in the very air you breathe, in the warmth of the stone beneath your feet, in the peace that fills your heart. This is Zandalar, the golden throne of the trolls, and it welcomes you. Feel the presence of the Loa watching over you as Bwansamdi watches over the souls of the departed. Know that you are safe and protected, just as the Zandalari are protected by the traditions and the faith that have sustained them for millennia. Let the weight of the day fall away from you, dissolving into the shadows, like the corruption of Gahun, dissolving under the power of the reorigination drive. Your breathing slows, deep and regular, like the eternal rhythm of the tides around Zandalar. Your thoughts grow peaceful, settling into stillness like the ancient stones of Aqir Dazar, where the kings and queens sleep their eternal sleep. There is nothing to fear, nothing to worry about, only rest and tranquility. The night settles over Zuldazar like a velvet blanket, the last traces of sunset fading from the sky. The stars emerge one by one, the same stars that King Dazar gazed upon 16,000 years ago, the same stars that have watched over every generation of Zandalari since the founding of the Empire. In their eternal light, you feel connected to something vast and timeless, a history that stretches back to the dawn of mortal civilization. The sounds of the jungle become a lullaby, the calls of nocturnal birds and the distant rumble of dinosaurs settling into sleep. The waterfalls that cascade down the mountains murmur their eternal song, water that has been falling since before the Sundering, since before the rise of the night elves, since before the trolls first climbed to these sacred peaks. Let these sounds wash over you, carrying away the cares of the waking world. The temples of the Loa stand silent now, their priests having completed the evening rituals. Incense smoke rises into the darkness, carrying prayers to the wild gods who have blessed Zandalar for so long. In the other side, Bwansamdi tends to the souls of the departed, and somewhere in that shadowy realm, King Rastakhan watches over his daughter and his people, proud of what they have become. The story of the Zandalari is a story of endurance, of surviving against impossible odds and emerging stronger than before. You too have this strength within you, the ability to face whatever challenges arise and to come through them unchanged in your essential nature. As you sleep tonight, let this strength fill you, preparing you for whatever tomorrow may bring. The Zandalari have faced darkness, that would have crushed lesser peoples. They have fought against the Aqir and the Blood Trolls, against Aqir the Soul Flayer and Gahun the Blood God. They have weathered the sundering of the world and the cataclysm that followed. And through it all, they have never lost hope, never abandoned their faith in the Loa and in themselves. You too can face your challenges with this same courage. Whatever difficulties you encounter, whatever obstacles stand in your way, you have the strength to overcome them. Like the Zandalari, you are more resilient than you know. Like the golden spires of Zuldazar, you can stand tall against the storms. The golden spires fade into the mist of dreams. The temple bells grow distant, their sound transforming into the gentle rhythm of your own heartbeat. The Loa are with you, their ancient power a comfort and a blessing. Sleep now and dream of the eternal empire that watches over you. So say the Loa. So go your dreams. Sweet sleep to you. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the complete story of the Zandalari. If you enjoyed this tale of the world's oldest empire, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more content, exploring the rich lore and history of World of Warcraft. May you rest well tonight, and may your dreams be filled with the golden splendor of Zuldazar and the eternal wisdom of the Loa. Until next time, farewell and sleep peacefully.